Good afternoon. Thank you for having me talk to you about the craft beers in the US market. I really appreciate y'all sharing the data set with me, and I hope that you enjoy the insights that I was able to derive from said data set. First of all, I'm going to have a quick walkthrough on what I'm going to be covering in this presentation. So I am going to be covering the beer distributions by the state, as in which ones have the more breweries, the ABV and the IBU distributions by the states. I'm going to be covering the distribution of the ABV variable, just like minimum, maximum, and other statistics on it. We'll also dive into the relationship between the ABV and the IBU variable and to see if there is any relationship at all. Next, I'll move on to a KNN model for the ale and the IPA styles of beers. And lastly, I'll be presenting y'all with a business suggestion. As you can see from the breweries by the states, Colorado does seem to be having the most amount of breweries. And then we have other states such as North Dakota and the Washington, D.C. that do not have that many breweries in them. Washington, D.C. makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't be having that many breweries right next to the president, but I found that interesting. Moving on, here is the median ABV by states. As you can see, it does seem to be very level, all of them being around 0.04 and 0.06. It's very hard to determine a winner, and so we can say that the ABV variable doesn't really have that much variability in it, which if you go over to the median IBU by the states, it's all over the place. It's really easy to see that you have a winner, and it's really easy to find the ones who are not doing as much, such as Wyoming, and then we have Arizona over here. And so it has way more variance as compared to the IBU variable that we just checked, as compared to the ABV variable that we just saw. And now we're going to be looking at which states did have the maximum IBU and ABV. So as for the maximum ABV, it was Colorado with the 0.128, which translates to 12.8% alcohol per volume. And then Oregon did have an IBU of 138, which is a very, very bitter beer. And there does seem to be no overlap on the top six beers, on the top six states that had the ABV and IBU. And so it can be said that they may be specializing in different sort of statistics in those beers. Speaking of statistics, here is how the ABV variable is distributed. It does seem to have a mode around 0.5, and it is right skewed, and the range is 0.11. The mode at 0.5 makes a lot of sense because this is a data set that pertains to beers, and beers do naturally have like a 0.5 ABV, and so that makes a lot of sense, and therefore it also makes sense why you don't have a lot of values above 0.5 because those are way stronger than a beer should be. And as for the relationship between the ABV and the IBU variable, there does seem to be a mild linear relationship between them two. It's kind of hard to make out, but you can see it right there. And it makes sense conceptually because as you do have a beer or any alcohol with more alcohol in it, it will be bitter, as hard liquors are more bitter than, say, ales. Speaking of ales, I wanted to share with you a KNN model or for classifying a beer as either an IPA or an ale that I made from the data set that you had given me. Full disclosure, I am only focusing on these two. And so stouts, lagers, anything that isn't an IPA or an ale is not included in it. But this is how the model is performing. It's performing very well on classifying things correctly, and it's really only not doing so well in this low range right here. And we can see why it's not doing well. It's because of the nature of the model. There seems to be some overlap in between around those data points. So whereas an IPA would likely have much higher ABV and IBU than an ale, there's a small area in which the IBU and ABV of the ale and IPA are similar, and so those aren't really being classified correctly. Now on to my business suggestion, it being what beer styles you, Budweiser, should focus in brewing in Texas. And so in order to derive an answer for this, I looked at the top 3 breweries regardless of state, and it did seem to be Brewery Vivint, Sun King Brewing Company, and Oscar Blues Brewery. And so I graphed those 3 breweries. I graphed the median ABV and I graphed the median IBU of those 3 breweries. And then I fed those median IBU and ABV values onto the model that I had created beforehand. The model was performing really well. It performed at over 80% accuracy, and it said that with those values, this alcohol, it would likely be an ale. And so that, on top of the fact that ales are the most popular type of beer in Texas, will allow me to suggest to y'all that if you do decide to open a brewery in Texas, it'd be an ale brewery. So, to summarize, I analyzed the ABV and IBU of the craft beers. I introduced the K&N model, and then I made a suggestion on what type of beer you should be brewing in Texas given that model. And I really hope you find this useful.